back on your wonderful campus. We've been doing this for the last 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years, maybe longer than that. Met Allison and my wife has the same name, so it's kind of, yeah, I may call you Al from time to time. That's okay.
Perfectly all right.
And I get so much out of this. And so I appreciate all of you showing up. I don't take it for granted. I'm sure some of you probably had no optionality here. You had to come. So I'm sensitive to that. But hopefully the goal is, and I think we're going to have some Q&A from the audience, that you ask the real questions, things that are on your mind. And I appreciate that not everybody's at the same point. We've got some folks who are probably thinking about graduation, and there's some of you who are just, beginning your journey. But I promise you ask the real questions, and I will give you the authentic, answers as best I can. So, but when you leave here, I want you to say that that was a pretty good use of time. So on the question, there are a few moments. I mean, we make hundreds, if not thousands of decisions throughout our respective journey. And the one thing I'll say right at the beginning is the journey is far from linear. And as you heard a bit from my bio, it's a pretty circuitous route. And I think if you take away nothing else, as you think about the forward life post Iona, when you get into so-called real world, just know that whatever linear lens you have is probably going to get challenged at some point in time. I'd say the first big decision I made was the move, to basically take an internship at Morgan Stanley. This was in October of 1992, and I know that that's pretty ancient for most of you. I was a senior in high school. I had real aspirations of being an educator. I was going to be a teacher. And, there was a number of women in my life at that time who were educators. And so that was the big influence. But I took this internship, 17-year-old kid running errands for bond traders on a small sales and trading desk in downtown Chicago. I oftentimes tell a story because it gives a little bit of context of how little I knew about the world of business. I interviewed in a gold suit, black shirt, black and gold tie. Don't judge me.
You were coordinated.
Yeah, I was coordinated. It was my Sunday best. But anyway, I got that internship and being in, that ecosystem with traders and salespeople who were, obsessed about what was going on in the economy, and how certain economic indicators like inflation, GDP, et cetera, how that influenced markets or whatnot. And so my curiosity started to kick in. And so when it was time to go to undergrad, initially, again, I was going to be an education major. Professor Greatrix, who's here, will appreciate this. By my first semester of my sophomore year, it was pretty clear to me that I was going to pivot from education, and I became an econ major in undergrad. So first big decision was taking the internship, because I was also trying to get a job at Wendy's at the same time. No joke. So I take the internship. Then the second big decision, inflection point for me, was moving to New York. So I'm born and raised Chicago. Shout out to anybody who's got, a nexus to the city of Chicago. But when I was 24 years old, shortly after I graduated, it took me 5.5 years to finish undergrad, by the way, because I was working full time at Morgan Stanley and going to school in the evening. But when I made the decision to move to New York, the world sort of opened up for me. And I had never lived outside of Chicago. I went to a commuter college. The first time I'd ever been on a plane was I was 20 years old. So this is a really big decision for me, but putting risk on and sort of betting on myself in some respects and moving to New York was the second thing. And then the third thing, and I'll stop here, was sort of embracing this mentality of trying different things. And so moving around the ecosystem, the financial services ecosystem, is something that has paid dividends for me, particularly as I've gotten more senior in my career. And the reason that that's important is because you have some folks who have a view that they should just specialize in a particular vertical, and they go very, very deep in that space. And trust me, there are some fantastic careers that you can have by doing that. I have taken more of a generalist approach in sort of building muscle in different domains, with the view that in the aggregate, particularly when you're in the quote unquote leadership sort of space, it just creates greater option value for you over time. And so there's more I can say on that, but I know there's a lot more ground that we want to cover. I think the takeaway from that is, from all of this is, you got to be willing to put risk on in the context of your career. And that means stepping into domains that you may be a bit uncomfortable with for a period of time, and just trusting that over time you'll build the necessary competency to add value.
I feel that goes into betting on yourself. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Can you speak about the mentors or opportunities, inspirations that led you to this point?
Oh, Jesus, this is going to be therapy now. Where's the couch I can lay out and speak to all of the scaffolding that I've had in my life that's made a difference. I mean, I'll try not to get overly biographical here, but I'm one of three boys. I'm the middle kid. Shout out to the middle kids here in the room. It's real. The struggle is very real. My brothers and I, we lost our parents early. My mom died, days before my second birthday. She was only 22. She had complications delivering my younger brother, had an aneurysm. And my younger brother was a newborn. I was turning 2, and my older brother was 4 years old. So very traumatic experience. And my dad, who was a widow, they were high school sweethearts, widow, 3 kids, was just overwhelmed, never recovered from it. And he wanted to be better than he was, but alcoholism, drugs played a role. He was killed when he was 39. That's a lot to absorb as young boys, and ultimately, in the case of my dad, we were teenagers. But we had the grace and the good fortune of our grandparents, my mom's parents, and we bounced around a little bit when we were younger, and there was a real risk that we were going to go into the foster care system. But my mom's parents, sort of stood in that gap. And they raised us. And so when you say like mentors and who helped you, all roads for me personally, and I know this is true for my brothers, starts with my grandmother. Like, she was a force of nature, 5'1", but a force of nature. But we lost her when I was 16, cancer. So my junior year of high school, October 12, 1991, my life changed forever. I became an adult at that particular point in time. And it was almost to the day, a year, that internship that I talked about in the last question. That opportunity presented itself almost a year to the day of her passing. And so as I look back on my life, I have this view that there was some serendipitous thing that sort of took place, that sort of where opportunity met need, and it sort of all came together. So it starts with my grandparents, but I love what Pat Summitt, the legendary basketball coach, late great Pat Summitt, who coached the Lady Volunteers and I think won like 8 national championships. Before she passed away, she got an award at the ESPYs, and she said, "We win in life with people." And I gave you a little bit of my personal story, but everybody in this room has some version of a story where you had a bit of adversity and there were people who sort of stepped in to help you get to the other side. And so in a career context, I've had the fortune of good managers. I've had the role modeling that I've taken a little bit from a lot of folks. Like, for example, one of my old managers who I worked for 20 years ago is coming to my house on Sunday, just because we've maintained that relationship, and he's been such a force for good for me. And so I think as you start thinking about your life again, both in an academic context, but in a professional context, you want to be proximate to people who are willing to give of themselves, who are willing to pour into you, who are willing to give it to you straight, right, as it relates to how you're performing and what you need to do to course correct. And sometimes it's a little painful because, depending on your personality and how you're wired, you're used to maybe hearing how great things are, and you surely need folks who are going to be willing to give you, and I'm dating myself here, give you the true Hollywood story, which none of the young people here in the room appreciate that reference. So there's been a lot of people along the way who have made a real difference and have been a really good role model for me. And I've also learned from folks what not to do along the way. So you obviously want to always be paying attention. in that way.
That is so awesome. Relationship capital is real. Always looking for that win-win. You know,
Yeah.
I love that.
But I just say on that point, like I do think it's important on just the whole mentorship piece because the question sometimes people have is, so how do you cultivate that? And in my view, I think the onus is on the mentee. Meaning, I think you should be really prescriptive around who you are inviting into your life to pour into you. And I think oftentimes there's a tendency to think about who is the person who's got the most substantive bio, who's the most senior person, who's the most impressive on paper, and we try to we migrate to those people because we think that these are the folks who are going to be best for us. So much of this is chemistry and fit, and I think the golden rule is the person has to care about me. They have to really care about me because they're going to be the people who will be willing to take the call when you need them. Willing to take the call when you're making some big decision in your life and you just want somebody to bounce things off of. So you want the person who kind of knows you. You want the person who has a bit of context of the decision that you're trying to make. And also you want somebody who's got some evidence that they've actually done the things that they're going to be advising you to do. So you want people who are actually credible. So I would just say to you, be really thoughtful in thinking about the people that you're going to have sitting around your proverbial table, your board of advisors. And trust me, all of us, we all will need them. We will all depend on some subset of people to help you get through and navigate this thing called life. If you're fortunate to have your parents, aunts, and uncles, that's great. But even if you are, you're still going to need other folks, to invite into your life. And I would just encourage you to just understand, one, advice can be very cheap. And there are people who are always willing to give you their opinion. So make sure you have the appropriate filters in place when you're thinking about the mentor-mentee dynamic. And the last thing I would say is when you have those forums with your mentors, be prepared. Because a lot of times people will come, they'll say, hey, can I get 15 minutes? Can I get 30 minutes? And they essentially take a rather lazy approach to that. And they come with their pen and their pad to be takers. And what I mean by that is they're just coming to listen versus to be actively engaged with whatever that big decision is you're thinking about, i.e., here's an example. I'm thinking about taking this job, and here's what I thought about. I did a little bit of homework, and these are some of the pros, but these are some of the challenges. What do you think? So you come prepared to contribute to the discussion versus, hey, I'm thinking about this, what do you think, kind of thing. So those are just a few thoughts. I can get pretty passionate about that topic, and hopefully there's something in there that resonates with you, but be really prescriptive around who you're inviting into your life.
Absolutely. And you've said in the past, burn the calories. Burn the calories as a mentee. The onus is on you. Work hard.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to pivot to something that you've done for the past 4 years now. You have a new role in the C-suite as a client officer, but you spent 4 years or so as the Chief Human Resources Officer. And I'm wondering, how have you seen the field of HR evolve, especially, during this time of artificial intelligence and technology just exploding?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of context I need to share. So growing up, in the business and being in markets, being in wealth, I had a great deal of trepidation when our CEO asked me to take on the role of running HR. And a big part of that was just sort of orthodoxy that I had grown up with, just stay close to the business, stay close to clients, or some of you business students, you appreciate this, stay close to the P&L, right? Like, you want to be proximate to matters that really influence the income statement. And so when our former chairman and CEO asked me to do it, I first said no to him. I said, thanks, but no thanks. I thought about it over the weekend, talked to my board of advisors, and some of them cautioned me about, you really don't want to get too far away from the business, and then you're going to become the quote unquote the HR guy. And you guys wouldn't know you wouldn't know James Gorman. He's now the chairman of Disney, which kind of speaks to the chops that he has. And remember, this is in fall of 2020, so we were all sitting at home in our pajamas, at this particular point in time. But when he asked me to, he set up a Zoom call to have another conversation on it. I knew at that moment that he wasn't really asking. Right. And to which I said, of course I'll take the job. It's my dream job, kind of thing. And I'm really glad that I did. I'm really glad that I did because I underappreciated the impact that I could have on a firm of 80,000 people. We're in 42 jurisdictions around the world. And when you think about what 2020 was, there was the pandemic, which, Morgan Stanley we lost 25 lives during that time. We've got 15,000 people in India. And I remember in the early part of 2021, because as we know, the virus was moving around the world in waves, right? It wasn't like there was this one event that was impacting everybody at the same time. And the scale of death that was happening in India, and I had just taken this job, and by the way, had no credentialing for it. So I was way over my head or out over my skis or whatever metaphor you want to use. And I was just like, why did I do this? Why did I take this job? But it gave me the opportunity to do a couple of things. Most importantly, reimagine the social contract between the employer and the employee. And there was a number of things that me and the team were able to do in partnership with the operating committee of the firm to strengthen our approach in a number of areas. One was just well-being amongst our employees, not just our employees, but their families. Physical health, mental health, financial health, et cetera. There's a host of things that we were able to reimagine. If there was a silver lining of the pandemic, it helped to demystify or destigmatize things like mental health because of the very real issues that families were having, again, not just our employees, but the kids of our employees. And there was so much that we were able to do to, again, build scaffolding around our people. And then there was the George Floyd moment, and all of the issues that were related to that in terms of what Morgan Stanley's value proposition was going to be in the context of inclusion. And then we get up on this issue of AI. And look, I'd say on this, we're still obviously very early days, but without question, this will be a revolutionary moment for society. And as often the case, the technology will run ahead of our social dynamic. I'll just call it that. And so when I think about it, and when I was very much into this as CHRO, we're in the early innings of modernizing the human capital ecosystem. Our approach to learning, given the fact that we're all and everyone in this room by definition are digital native, and the way we learn, the way we consume content is very, very different. So how we show up for training and development, it's a much more software driven bit. Talent acquisition, all of you will at some point, if you're not already, looking for your next, as you get your career started, your approach and what your experience will be almost entirely digital. Of course, there'll be human interaction along the way, but we completely reimagined our talent acquisition strategy, which so much of it was software driven, so much of it was driven by AI capability in terms of just the matching technology of what was the job opportunity versus what's the resume of the talent, and how we bring those two things together. So there's a number of different use cases where AI in the context of how we thought about like our human capital, like human capital plus the technology. Like there's so many different use cases that I could talk about there. So we were very much in the weeds on that. But the bigger question is around the reconfiguration of the workforce, which is where most people immediately goes. And I would just simply tell you, it is still way too early to really know that. But what I will say is I think that there are going to be three components to it. I think that there's going to be a subset of our workforce where the technology will clearly create a dynamic where you will have a subset of the workforce that will be impacted by that, and those jobs will go away, right? Those jobs will go away. A support subset of, in the case of Morgan Stanley, again, our 80,000 people. There's another subset within the workforce where there will be this dynamic where it'll create efficiencies, it'll create productivity gains, but you will still need the talent. But the thing that we don't talk about enough is there will be a subset of our workforce where the leverage of the technology will be so great, and it will create such a competitive opportunity for us where we're actually going to be hiring more people. And so if you were to ask me, will Morgan Stanley have fewer employees 5 years from now or more employees? I'm actually in the camp where I think we're going to have more employees. And so I think that there's this false choice that sort of dominates the headlines. There's this choice of like man, woman versus machine. I reject that premise. I think that this is going to be, by and large, a man, woman plus machine dynamic, and I think the productivity opportunities, and I'm not suggesting that there won't be some pain for some, but I think that in the netting of it all, the productivity boom that we have the potential to have, and there's so much in public policy that we've got to get right, that I think could be fantastic. And so what I would say to the crew that's here is lean into this. And I think it's going to be easier for this generation for a whole host of obvious reasons. This isn't the first time that society has faced some paradigm shift. You can go back to the Industrial Revolution. You can go back to something more recent when the internet came. And when you look back on these things, I mean, as much as there is disruption, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think to the degree you can start leaning into some of these platforms and get comfortable with them, I think you're going to be better served for it.
That's so good. It leads right into, great segue to this question. How will the demand for certain skills shift, and how should young professionals here prepare in the age of AI?
There's so much that's in there, and again, we don't have the time to unpack all of this fully, but relationship-based talent-driven is the bedrock of these institutions in the final analysis, and the whole IQ EQ dynamic I also think is an appropriate frame here. I think having the ability to connect with people, having the ability to consume a lot of information and play back that information to would-be clients, would-be patients, etc. I think that there's always going to be a bit of a need for that. I think having, again, as an attribute matter, having a bit of competitive urgency as part of your just general makeup, I think is something that will serve you extraordinarily well. As I said in the prior question, I do think that there is going to be aspects of the quote-unquote value chain from a work perspective that will be outsourced to software. That will certainly happen, but I still believe in so many of our industries that the value prop of being able to relate and to connect and to influence and to lead, there's still going to be a tremendous amount of value for that. So whether that's in a banking context, whether it's in a medical context, et cetera. Look, do I think pursuing a career as a developer, do I think that that's going to be a bit more challenged? Yes, I do, because as we now know, there's going to be a capability set that's going to make that, in and of itself, not nearly as relevant as it has been in prior years. But I think, if you're in an advisory, seat, while the fact set may be easy to get and pull, by way of, again, leveraging this technology, your ability to be able to articulate, empathize, I don't think that that's going to shift, all that much. I mean, I think education is another one of these examples where there's this big sort of vexing question of, what does it mean for teaching on the forward? If we all have the answers in our pocket, what's the value of that? And I think it's fair to say, particularly with knowing my audience and all the folks who are here observing this, I think there should be very little concern, because human nature and the human dynamic is just far more complicated than what an algorithm can produce. And so I think if I'm a young person, one, I lean into the technology, I understand the technology, and I get extraordinarily comfortable with the leverage that it can ultimately provide, but suppress the fear that somehow this is going to render me and my future less relevant, because history just happens to be an incredibly powerful teacher in how we've been here before. As the book says, there's nothing new under the sun. While the technology or the disruptor is a little bit different, I think that we've seen this movie before in terms of there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity for folks on the forward.
I just want to dig into something you said, that EQ, emotional intelligence, is important. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because that's something that I try to infuse in my pedagogy, because I feel that outside of the, university, being able to be a team player and collaborate, have empathy is incredibly important. And I'm just wondering if you can speak on that a little bit.
Look, I think that I'll give you a view that's at an individual level that hopefully you'll find helpful, and then I'll give you a lens in a leadership context. So 2 frameworks that I've used, and hopefully you find some value in them. The first, in an individual context, I think there's 3 attributes that most successful people have. I hate using the word all, but it's pretty hard to find successful individuals that didn't have these 3 attributes. The first is a high degree of self-confidence. Not cockiness, self-confidence that's anchored in the evidence that you can do hard things. And the fact that you all are sitting here is just one fact set that I could point to, because it's not easy to get into a great institution like this. You had to put in some work to obviously get over the line, but having some evidence that I can do hard things. And for some of us, and for many of us, that hard thing may be something that happened in your life, and some adversity that you ultimately had to deal with, but a high degree of self-confidence that I can be resilient, and then I'm willing to work extraordinarily hard. So that's the first. Second is an ability to manage insecurity. We all have it. We know that we all have it. Some of us are just much better at masking it than others. But being able to manage the insecurity when you're sitting in rooms with people who've got whatever their credentialing is or what have you, where you can all of a sudden feel like, should I even be here? And trust me, there are more than a few instances in my career, because that's the problem with bios. You hear bios, it's all output, right? It doesn't really get into all of the shortcomings and all of the things that you would, that you wish you could do over again because you didn't do them so well. And I've got plenty of those, and that's not false modesty. It just happens to be a fact. But being able to manage your insecurity, I think, is going to be, again, back to this idea of the future. It's going to be something that's going to be one of these evergreen attributes that I think you're going to want to have control over. And most importantly, with young people, in my view, is impulse control. Being able to control your impulses in your decision making. And it's one of those things where I said earlier that, your journey, I don't know what you are aspiring to do. I'm sure that was just given all the brain power and the talent that's in this room. It's a beautiful thing, this tapestry of talent that I'm looking out at. You guys are going to all go off and do your own respective things, but irrespective of what you're going to chase in life, entrepreneurial, you're going to do the corporate thing, whatever it may be, I can promise you, you will have moments where you're going to be forced to make decisions, and or you're going to go through something, and you're going to be tempted to do what is easiest. And I just encourage you to make sure, and this gets back to having mentors and folks around the table who are going to challenge you to make sure that you're not overly impulsive. So high degree of self-confidence, manage your insecurities, and obviously having the ability to manage your impulses. So that's one frame. And then from a leadership perspective, it's something that Satya Nadella, who's a client of ours, but happens to be one of the more iconic CEOs in the world, and what he did to transform Microsoft, which was obviously had this monopoly for a long time, really was the entity that scaled the PC, but they lost their way over a 15-year period of time, and now, of course, they're a $3 trillion market cap. But in the context of leadership, he said something that I'll never forget. Said that there are three things that leaders have to have, which I think sort of ties to this EQ piece: model, coach, care. You've got to be a really good role model. You have to role model the values, and I know the faculty here, takes a great deal of pride in this. Like, role model the virtues and the values that you ascribe to the institution. So you got to be a really good role model. You have to be a really good coach. And oftentimes in the context of each EQ, we can lose this. Coaching, in my view, there should always be some tension. And this also gets back to the point about mentors and sponsors and what have you. Mentors are not people who just tell you how great you are. They're not just people who tell you that you're doing a fantastic job. These are folks who are willing, and the athletes here in the room, I think, can appreciate this. These are folks who are going to be willing to push you and sometimes make you a bit uncomfortable. There's a guy who, one of our co-presidents at the firm, this guy Andy Saperstein, who I've worked for a number of years. I was a big hoops guy growing up, but not that good. That's why I'm here with all of you. He had this tendency of forcing me left. I'm a right-handed player, but as he was coaching me, he would push me left, metaphorically. And it was really uncomfortable. And there were moments where I really didn't like him as a result of it, but I absolutely became a better player as a result of it. So coaching is really important. And then lastly, most importantly, particularly in a post-2020 world, is care. And for some of the folks who are standing up in the room here, who may be of a similar vintage as me, that's not a word that we would have used in a corporate, surely in a corporate context, that my manager has to care about me. And I do think that that is a really important prerequisite if you're going to lead people, on the forward, is that you actually have to have the ability. Number one, you've got to be proximate to them, understand what's going on with them, understand what's going on, even in their families, right? And I think I grew up in a generation where there was this real separation of church and state. Like, the responsibility of the corporation was to do what? To produce returns on capital, right? It's Milton Friedman. I'm trying to impress Caitlin here. Go back to Milton Friedman, right? Like, the role of the corporation is to produce returns for the shareholder. And I think that even with the tension that's going on in our society right now around diversity and some of these other, programs, there's this tension of what is the role of the corporation. And in my view, and it's my own view, is I think it moves beyond just the shareholders. I think you have a responsibility for all of your stakeholders. Your investors, yes. Your clients, yes. But also, and this is what the last 4 years taught me, your employees. And one can make the argument that your employees should be first on that list, because if your employees are good, your clients will be good. If your clients are good, your shareholders will ultimately be good. But that's just my own personal frame.
I love that. Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Before jumping into the audience and Q&A, Mandell, if you could just offer any advice to our young professionals aspiring to build impactful careers in financial services and beyond.
Advice. Look, I sort of mentioned this already when I talked about the big three: self-confidence, managing insecurity, and impulse control. I also think you need to have an answer to the following question. We're in the business school, so I trust that you will appreciate this. What is your alpha? Who can tell me what alpha is in the context of investing? What's your alpha, sir? There's some element of it that's right. Like, to know that you have produced alpha, there has to be some form of a benchmark, right? But I'm looking for something a little bit more nuanced, and one of my partners at Morgan Stanley is here, Carlos Munoz, who lives this stuff. So I would, Carlos, give you a moment to impress your son, but I'm not going to do that. I want to hear from one of the students who can build on the point that was just raised there in terms of alpha. Like, what is alpha? Anyone know? Some of you know. You're just being shy. All right, I'm going to give the answer. Fine. Alpha is the incremental return. I'm giving you a very crude definition, but the incremental return above and beyond the market. I.e., if I'm a portfolio manager and I'm managing a basket of or portfolio of stocks, and I'm being benchmarked to the point that was made before, I'm being benchmarked to the S&P 500 or to the market, if you when in the spirit of holding me accountable for generating value for investors or for clients, I look at what was your return, portfolio manager, versus the market. And the idea is to produce a return that's higher than what the market would bear. So alpha versus beta, if you will, the excess return that I'm delivering. So in the context of just playing the metaphor forward, and as you think about your careers, is you want to be able to answer the fundamental question. When I say what's your alpha, is what is the value that you bring to a particular institution? And even if you say to yourself that, you know what, I'm not actually going to do the corporate thing, I'm actually going to be an entrepreneur. But I would say to you, even in that context, you will eventually have to answer that same question to investors, right? As you're raising capital, is like, why is my marginal dollar going to be better placed with you than someplace else, right? And so being able to articulate, who you are and what attributes you will bring to an institution. And by the way, being able to evidence that based on what you did when you were in the Iona University ecosystem, right? So for those of you who are in leadership positions, right, like I've long said, when I'm looking at a resume, while looking at the 4.0 or the high threes on a 4 scale is impressive, I would much rather hire a 3.3, 3.4 who has a breadth of experiences. I don't mean like the window dressing that people do on their resume, but there's real rigor in the experiences that they've had. And when folks are willing to take on like a leadership position, you're in student government, you're involved in this student organization or that student organization, that sort of evidences the curiosity that you have about a particular discipline, and you can explain that when I push on it a little bit. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So when you're thinking about your story, your journey, et cetera, I think just being willing on, basically when you're put on the button to say, why you, back to this alpha concept, you know how to articulate it. And I just can't tell you how important that is to sort of orient your thinking around this idea of who am I, why would I be additive to a particular institution, or something along those lines. So I think if you could take that forward, that would be super helpful. And the last thing I'll say on this is, as it relates to just the career, the journey, the whole bit, is you also have to be willing to suffer a little bit now. I'm going to be the old guy now. There is a measure of pain and suffering that comes with the journey. And I think those who understand it, going back to this idea of impulse control and just sort of understanding that there will be hard days, but knowing that, it's one of the things I say to my daughters. I've got twin girls, they're 11 years old. I say, when things are hard, it probably means you're learning something. And I think if you could take that simple thing forward as you start your journey in your career, I think that you're probably going to do just fine over time. Hopefully that's okay, that resonates. Like, I didn't show up here to somebody tell me I got to suffer in pain, but there's no way around suffering. I promise you. Yeah.
But doing hard things gets easier. What do you say? Do hard better.
Handle hard better.
Handle hard.
And that's not mine. That's Coach Lawson at Duke University, the women's basketball coach at Duke. She has this. If you get a few minutes, go on YouTube, and she gave this talk to her team, and it was pretty provocative. I think the talk went viral, where she just said, like in life, like we say to ourselves, "Oh, if I do this one thing, it'll get easier." Like some of you is like, "Okay, when I get accepted into college, things will get easier." Right? Or when you go back to your high school years, if I just get through this exam, things will get easier. And the reality is, it's a bit of a paradox in life, I guess. It never gets easier. Never gets easier. But what happens over time, right, as you learn, grow, absorb the different experiences that we have in life, you actually learn to handle hard better. And so you're building capital. You don't know it, but you're building capital as you grow and as you learn and as you work hard and all the scarring that comes with all of that. So you just learn to absorb hard a little bit better. And as one of the great talks, it's about a 5-6 minute, sort of reel. I would strongly implore you to check that out. Good memory. Yeah.
My husband doesn't like that. Thank you so much, Mandell. All right. All right. Now, students, faculty, staff, you're now invited to ask questions.
Yeah. Any questions? Come on, young people. We got a few here. And if you could just tell me what year you're in, that'd be great.
Did you make it where you are today?
What's your name?
I'm Aiden.
Aiden, how you doing, partner?
Good.
What year are you?
I'm a senior.
Oh, big time. Okay.
Big time. Did you make it where you are today despite adversity, or was the adversity a driving factor in your success?
That's a fantastic question. And it ties to the point about, managing insecurity. Massive amount of insecurity when I moved to New York because I was first in the family to go to university. I went to a local university in Chicago, Northeastern Illinois University. It's the only school I applied to. I applied to it because it was a teacher's college. It was born in the 1960s, and I didn't apply anywhere else, right? So that's just how sure I was that I was going to be an educator. But when I moved to New York, you start to really learn about, the brands of these different universities and schools, and there was a big, comparison of where'd you get, and I'd never had so many people ask me, where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to school? And you're coming up against kids who have gone to Ivy League institutions, et cetera. And so I was like, oh, hey, the different game here. And so I started to, over time, I started saying I went to the Northeastern Illinois University, which very few people had heard. And folks would say, Northwestern? I'm like, no, the other school, Northeastern. So big level of insecurity for me, and I will tell you that chip on the shoulder was a bit of fuel for me. It definitely drove me to prove that I could keep up. It drove me to prove that I was good enough. And so there was definitely an element of, I'm going to outwork you, right? There was definitely an element of that. And I think that that's okay. Again, I'm a Chicago guy, and I appreciate that it's not your generation, but The Last Dance on Netflix, about the Bulls and Jordan, like it would talk about, so I think where I am on the Jordan LeBron debate. We can have that if you want. Jordan would almost manufacture things to get him fired up about a game. And I think all of us have a little bit of that, sort of in us. So to me, the adversity, one was survival. I gave you guys a bit of context there. But the other was this desire to prove that I was good enough. And by the way, never really leaves you. So when I took the human capital job running HR, I joined the firm's operating committee. There's only 12 of us that run the firm. And when you walk into that room, you're sitting at the table with an extraordinary amount of brain power and highly successful people. And so my insecurity was eating me alive, right? In terms of, this whole imposter syndrome thing. But the more time you sit at the table and you come to realize that they bleed like I do too, you get a little bit more comfortable, what have you. But it's a great question. So, but in short, yeah, the insecurity was a bit of fuel for me. The adversity was a bit of fuel for me. And I obviously want to make my grandmother proud. I want to make my parents proud, for sure. A couple questions here.
How's it going? My name is John.
Hey, John.
I'll just itchy. How passionate leadership skills are.
Emotional intelligence. The reality is we're all sort of plots on a spectrum in terms of our EQ. The whole IQ, EQ dynamic. Some of us are more extroverted, and frankly, it's a bit easier to, in a familial context, show our affection. And for those of us, we're a little bit more introverted, and maybe it's less natural for you. For some of you, as you get older, you'll find that it'll be easier for you to give tough feedback, and for most of us, we kind of fall into this passive aggressive sort of space, which, frankly, isn't particularly helpful, particularly when you're trying to help somebody get better at something. So look, I think in the final analysis, to thy own self be true. And I think you've got to figure out what tools you can use, depending on the context of messaging to help you sort of convey that message. So depending on where you are on the spectrum, for some of us, it'll be harder. For some of us, it'll be easier. But I think it starts with, okay, knowing who you are, and as a communication matter, what form is easier? Is it just to send an email, just kind of break the glass and sort of get it out there and then have the conversation? Or are you comfortable, with this notion that, hey, I owe you the feedback, and so boom, right between the eyes? And but this notion of, I don't mean to give you brutal feedback. I don't think feedback needs to be brutal. And that gets back to this idea of care and having, I don't know if it's bedside manner, but having, being really thoughtful about how you message, and not just message that here's the problem, but here's how I think we can get on the other side of it, and here's what I'm willing to do to help you with that. And so I think if you take kind of that framework in terms of how you engage, whether it's with a teammate, whether it's with an employee, whether it's with a cousin or whomever, again, I appreciate them giving you guys very broad strokes here. I think that'll serve you well. There's a question here.
I'm Michael. I'm a freshman. So my question for you is, how did you see yourself grow as a person when going from a role of managing wealth for other people to managing just employees of a firm like Morgan Stanley?
I don't know how, deep you guys are on, like, again, the whole investing, world, but there's a concept when you're investing, particularly in like private equity. It's like a J curve. There's a bit of this J curve phenomenon, and maybe as I'm looking around the room, maybe I move away from this metaphor, but I bring it up because when you move into a new domain, where you have no real expertise. Now, the thing that I did benefit from is I've been at my firm for 32 years. Like, I've never worked anywhere else. And so, in that context, I have a lot of relationship capital. And I think I get a lot of grace because I've been able to demonstrate in different domains over the years, that there's some level of competency here. And I think that folks, again, the grace piece comes in because it takes a little bit of time before I can sort of get my bearings and figure out how to add value in the new space that I'm in. And so I think I've been afforded that a little bit. So going from private wealth to HR, the J curve analogy was, it was really uncomfortable. And I felt like I was regressing, right? In terms of like, so if adding value is this way, I felt like I was going this way. And so you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. like, why did I take this job? Right? And that's when I say pain and suffering, that's what I mean. Like you get really uncomfortable. And but at some point you hit a floor, right? You trough out, and then you start to, oh, wait a minute. Actually, okay, I got this concept. And then there are some things that you've learned that have nothing to do with HR that you sort of bring into the seat. And then over time, you start to add value. But the most important piece, particularly when you get into a more senior level, is the talent, the team that you have around you. And then you obviously, as a mindset matter, you have to have a mindset where you're very comfortable being surrounded by people who know a particular domain better than you do. And you realize what your role is in that dynamic. And people, when they go from being really good producers to leaders, they struggle with that because they're so used to being the person who's giving the answers versus being the person who is a little bit more, hey, I'm just nurturing, this talent that's around me and making sure that we're optimizing more as a team. So hard to do, but again, I think it's super important to have, again, that impulse control so that you don't sort of lose your way when you're going through that period where you don't feel like you have the competence to add as much value as maybe you're used to adding. So it just takes a little bit of time, so a little bit of grace, but just know that you'll get there. You'll get there. Take maybe one more. And
Yeah, I think we have.
folks get back to your day.
Hello,
Hey, sir, how are you?
can you hear me?
I can.
I just have a question. When are you gonna run for president?
Hey.
I'd vote for you.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. That's very kind. That would be never. That would be never. Look, it's funny. Look, our country, this is, and now the conversation is getting real. Like, and teachers are like, oh God, here we go. Here's the viral moment. The country is at a really interesting place, and there's this is my own personal view. There's this pretty compelling dichotomy that that we're sort of living in, where I think you can make a very credible argument that the U.S. is the best place in the world to be objectively, and it's not even close. And I think as a platform, in the name of where you can have a really good idea, where that idea meets capital formation that can scale in a way that changes the world, there is a tremendous amount of evidence to support that. $30 trillion economy, solid demographics, and where all the debate around immigration relative to other developed nations, we're much better than most. Like, look at Japan, look at China, et cetera. So there's a lot to love. The diversity of the country, et cetera, et cetera. But then obviously our politics are, we're in a pretty tough spot right now. And we all in this room, we agree on far more than we think we disagree on. Far more than we disagree on. Because we all, in the final analysis, want the same thing. We want the same things for our families, for ourselves, et cetera. But there's these highly emotive topics that have proven to be very effective wedge items, where we actually feel like we're on different sides of the proverbial owl. And so that part's a bit unfortunate. But I still romanticize with this idea that that our government, will have serious people making serious decisions on the forward. There's a lot of concern about, some of the provocative things that are sort of in play, at the moment. But I would just remind you all, because you guys are the future, right? I mean, literally, are the ones that are going to take this thing forward over time, is the resilience of the place. There's a lot of evidence that this country can withstand a lot. And this is where history is a real guide. And so for me, I'd oftentimes think about the 1960s, where you had a wildly popular president assassinated. You had the civil rights leader of the century in MLK get killed. Bobby Kennedy got killed. Riots happening everywhere. Vietnam War. President who had to step down because he was impeached. I mean, you had a lot of bad stuff happening in a decade. And the place sort of held it together. And so for all of the cynicism that exists in a world where our media landscape is far more fractured, we don't have a Walter Cronkite that we're all tuning into. We're all in our bubbles or what have you. And I just have to believe that there's a forcing function that is going to shake this country in a way that we get back to this place where we actually feel like we're all in it together. And so the last couple of things, I'm sorry, because he asked the question, thank you, is even on the topic of diversity, I think you got to be, we got to have enough humility in doing the work where, how do we do this work where folks can appreciate this is about creating pathways for folks. It's about creating pathways. It's not this fixed pie scenario where I'm taking from one to give to the other, because the pie, going back to a $30 trillion country, the pie is so great. But also, you got to be humble in doing the work. And I would say this to my team back at Morgan Stanley, how do we also talk about diversity where white men don't feel like it excludes them? And not even just white men, but their mothers of young white boys who saying, okay, does this mean my kid is going to have a tougher time? So how do we think about this in a way where everybody, and I'm not being Pollyannish here, because again, trust me, we talk about tough and hard. I got you, right? Like I could meet you there. But so I'm not being naive about the reality of it, but I do think that there's a need for us to get to a place where, we get away from this, the you versus me, and we see how great the opportunity is for all of us if we can come together and do that with rigor and a bit of humility. So I leave you with this. 5 questions. There are 5 questions that I think you want to ask yourself in life. And hopefully, you find these to be super helpful. Not 5, there's 4. Am I learning? Am I growing? Am I having impact? Am I happy? Am I learning? Am I growing? Am I having impact? Am I happy? That's a framework that I use when making career decisions. I think that's a framework that you could find helpful as you're thinking through like what you want to do in life. Am I learning? That's a great thing. Am I having impact? Am I growing? And most importantly, am I happy? I think if you can answer yes to all 4 of those questions, then put your head down and keep going for another year or 2. But anyway, thank you, Allison. Always good to be with you guys.
Thank you so much, Mandell.